Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I was asked to talk about patient safety and the work we're doing at PCAST and about opioids and the technologies we have for that. So I thought this story was relevant to both. When Parker died, it took a young man's life away, and it also ruined other lives, from his mother to his wife, sister, and Dr. Katang, who for a while stopped practicing medicine. Many people, when they unfortunately are involved in a preventable death, with nurses, doctors, they leave, which is a real shame, because they're the last people you want to leave because they really care. So we've been at this for a while. Many of you have. I love all the programs that you have. I love this HEART program, which I know is based on candor. I think that's an exceptional program, and it'll be great one day if every hospital is practicing it. After President Biden got elected, he not only asked me to serve on PCAST, he urged the PCAST leadership to go after patient safety and let us do a report on patient safety. Finally, unanimously, the report was approved and it was released. And we're going to actually present it personally to President Biden next week. It's something that he's been eager to get from us. We hope he will like what we're recommending. We hope he will enact all, but hopefully some of our recommendations. Our recommendations are roughly as follows. Number one, to put somebody in charge of patient safety. And who better than the HHS secretary? Number two, get a White House coordinator, like President Biden has for the cancer moonshot, that makes sure all the different agencies are doing what they said they're going to do and report it to the president regularly. Number two, create a national patient safety team that consists of experts, patient advocates, those who are affected the most by the problems of medical errors. And here's the opportunity we saw as some of the key recommendations we made. What we know is that some medical errors we don't know yet how to prevent. But there are many of them. In fact, the most prevalent ones that we have evidence-based practices that if employed, they could be maybe even eliminated, if not dramatically reduced. Whether it's the great work Dr. Pronovost did with CLABSI, to medication error, to things that have to do with hospital-acquired infection, things that have to do with opioid overdose in hospitals. Many of them. There exists 15, sometimes 30 years of work that shows if a certain procedure is put in place, they can be eliminated. I serve on the board of Children's Hospital of Orange County. They have implemented all of those evidence-based practices. And they also went the next step in tying the faculty's bonuses to zero preventable death. And they have seen some exceptional results. For nearly 6 years, we had no preventable deaths. I recently spent time in a hospital, UC Irvine, for 3 weeks. Unfortunately, I suffered from an aneurysm, actually September 28th. It was almost a year ago. My son found me unresponsive in my office about 10 o'clock at night, called emergency. I eventually made my way to UC Irvine. UC Irvine was the first academic hospital to implement all the evidence-based practices. So I became the beneficiary of their work. And it was incredible. I noticed how everything they did to me was protocolized, whether they were putting a central line in, whether they were giving medication. Because I knew what those processes were, they were following it. And they really had loving clinicians. I felt like a little bug caught inside a spider web, because every time I moved, they were there responding to me, seeing what I needed. It was amazing. And I survived it. I'm here, thank God, no deficit. But there's a part of that story I want to share with you later when we talk about opioids. But we recommended in this report that evidence-based practices be identified. We've asked 1 or 2 government bodies to identify the high medical errors, things that are killing people the most, not what's costing Medicare the most, but things that are killing people the most. Identify those that have evidence-based practices, go after them, publish them, and then align the incentives of hospitals to implement them. Kind of like Chalk did, where they lined up 0 to the faculty's bonuses. So we hope that eventually every hospital will implement all of them. And one of the things we recommended is that if a hospital implements these and someone still gets hurt, they should be paid, not just for the primary care given, but any secondary care that was necessary for those who survived these errors. But in converse, if people didn't implement them and someone was harmed, we think not only they shouldn't be paid for the secondary work, but not even the primary. So hopefully we create the carrots and sticks we need, so at least the processes that we know work gets implemented. I mentioned Chalk and UC Irvine, and we're lucky that in Orange County, we have an adult hospital and a children's hospital that have. But as the founder of Patient Safety Movement Foundation and a member of the board, there are less than 100 hospitals I know of in the whole world that have implemented all of them. 100. Some have implemented a few, some have implemented several, but not all of them. And by the way, if you're curious what we think those should be, please visit the Patient Safety Movement Foundation website. We have a listing of every evidence-based practice. There's a summary checklist like Dr. Pronovost had done for CLABSI, and a full body of other supporting data behind each one. The other suggestion we made to the president is to demand transparency. We believe it's wrong that we don't know the true number of harm countrywide. And we think it should be known hospital by hospital on their website and reported to the government, so that as consumers of healthcare, we know hopefully which hospitals are the safest. And hopefully competition, competing for being a safe hospital and having 0 harm becomes something hospitals can brag about and work towards. Also, as Heather said, we emphasize safety of the caregivers. You can't expect our caregivers to care about our patients if we don't care about them. And there's a lot we could do in that area. And we want those done. And we want annual reports about every one of these to the president, but at least eventually, maybe even quarterly. We also see some bright spots in technology that can help. AI could help look at a lot of data all the time. AI does not sleep. And it can hopefully help clinicians know about problems before it's too late to do something about it. As it looks at not only the vital signs data, the electronic medical record data from the lab, from radiology, even data from physicians' offices, and maybe even one day data from their healthy state, that all could go to AI and help predict problems before it's too late. We've also recommended research to be done in the area of patient safety, because while we believe we know many of the things that can be done to dramatically reduce preventable harm, there's a lot that we still need to learn and do, hopefully to get to 0 harm. OIG did a report, I'm sure you've seen it, 10 years later, from the first report they did, I think in 2008. And if you look at the data really clearly, you could potentially say we've improved by 10%. But it looks like we haven't made any progress. It's a real shame that 1 out of 4 patients were harmed. And they believe half of them are preventable. And this was auditing hospitals' records that were taking care of Medicare patients. So the data is there. We know to err is human, but we also know that it's inhumane and irresponsible if we don't put evidence-based practices in place to avoid human errors from becoming medical errors. So I'm really hopeful that we have struck the right balance with this. And these are all things that President Biden can do. They don't require legislature, because our task that we were given is to, what can the president do without anybody else by the agencies that he controls? So that's where the recommendations are focused on. So it's published now. Please take a look at it. We'll be presenting it, like I said, next week to the president, and we hope a few executive orders will come out of it and some positive change that we've all been waiting for will occur. So let me get to the opioids issue. First of all, we made pulse oximeters that could work even during patient motion and low perfusion. That's how Masimo was created. I started it out of my garage. I took a $40,000 loan on my condo, 1989. I had just finished my master's work in the area of adaptive filters and AI, and I thought I could use that technology to get rid of the noise. And fortunately, it worked. And the studies, many studies came out that showed it reduced false alarms by 95%, and it actually improved the detection of true alarms by over 95%. And since the advent of this technology, it's the first time pulse oximetry has been shown to make a clinical difference. When the first pulse oximeters were created, there was a study done in the Netherlands that showed 10,000 patients with, 10,000 patients without, no difference. And yet it became ubiquitous. Our technology has been shown to help reduce blindness in babies, retinopathy prematurity, by titrating the oxygen just right in the incubator. Help detect CCHD on newborns, which I didn't predict any of those two when I started Masimo, but I did hope if we made a product that worked through motion, it could be used on people that were being administered opioids in the post-surgical wards, and it could save their lives. Because if we knew the false alarms of pulse oximeters had made them unuseful and taken out of the general floor. So I was telling President Clinton the story about the Dartmouth-Hitchcock study, that it was a 10-year study that was done that showed not only the group that had our technology, there was no more dead in bed, no more brain damage, where the group without it had several, but they saved $7 million a year by reducing rapid response team activation and by 50%, ICU transfers by 60%. So when I was telling him the story, he said, well, that's great. I'm so happy to hear that, Joe, and I know that hopefully will save several thousand lives. But he said, did you know that we're losing more people, like 10 times more at the time, at home for opioid overdose? And I did not know that, believe it or not. I feel ashamed. It took the president to tell me that. And he said, you should go try to do something about that. I remember going home that night and thinking about it. I came up with this idea. Next morning, I told my team, and we began working on it. It's what became Opioid Halo. Basically, it's a tetherless device on your finger that sends the pulse ox data to your phone, goes to the cloud, and if you have a desaturation from opioid affecting your respiration, it'll send an alarm to try to wake you. And if it doesn't wake you, it goes to someone you've given permission to see your data. If they don't respond, it goes to the nearest ambulance and gives them your location to come rescue you. We were working with FDA to get that approved. In fact, FDA chose that product as one of 8 products that could help the opioid epidemic when COVID happened. And we saw the hospitals overwhelmed by patients. So we went to the FDA and said, what do you think about approving this for monitoring people with COVID at home? And only if they need ICU care, they can be brought in. The FDA approved that in 2 weeks. We deployed it after a month. Hundreds of hospitals used it, and it became a real lifesaver. And in fact, a study came out of Ohio Hospital, University Hospital, showed that it reduced mortality by 70% and reduced their cost by $11,000 a patient. So we finally got approval for this device now, just about 2 months ago, for opioid. It's the only product as a medical device company we have received FDA approval, not FDA clearance, which is normally what we get. And it's been approved not only by prescription, but over the counter. And we hope it'll do a lot of good in reducing, if not eliminating, 107,000 deaths last year to opioid overdose? And 20,000 from prescription opioids, like the one I showed you in that video for a tonsillectomy. So we had this, and then I went to the hospital for what I told you about. And knowing how opioid is addictive, I kept saying, I don't want opioids. I don't want opioids. Finally, my pain got so bad. So bad. I think I was a 10. I've never been there before, so I don't know if this gets worse than that. So I said, fine, give me opioids. But it wouldn't work on me. It had gone too far. So fortunately, they did something that they hadn't done before. I guess it was done in Florida. They actually put a block. They put something through my nose, right to my brain, and put the injection in, and that broke the vicious cycle I was in, and then opioids regularly worked on me. But then it was just a matter of a couple of days where I couldn't wait a full 6 hours. I went from 6 hours, I wanted it in 5, I wanted it in 4. I became really, really irritable. We have a product that we licensed called Bridge. It's a device that goes at the back of your ears and serves nerve stimulation. And we licensed it because we'd seen data that showed on 80% of the people, within 20 minutes, it gets rid of the withdrawal symptoms. It sends impulses to the vagus nerve, the ocular nerve, and a couple other nerves, and it blocks the pain. So my team brought that into me, and it was crazy. It worked. I soon went away back to 6. I went from the full dose to a 2/3 dose, 1/3, and then 0. And I was telling that story to President Clinton when he said, look, I want to have a meeting. I want to tell everybody about it. Your personal experience means a lot. So this is a meeting we had where we met with a bunch of stakeholders from around the country about both opioid halo and Bridge. And I think I got a picture. This is opioid halo. That's the sensor I mentioned to you that goes on your hand. And this lasts for about a week, and it's continuous, and then it goes to either a hub if your phone isn't around, and then it goes to the cloud and then sends all the alarms. And I think that's the Bridge. So Bridge is this device I mentioned. These electrodes are put, 3 of them in the front and 1 behind the ear, and these nerve stimulations on 80% of the people within 20 minutes gets your pain from withdrawal out. What took 4 or 5 days of methadone to do, this does in about 20 minutes. So we're pretty excited about these 2 new tools added to the Narcan toolkit to hopefully help people not die of opioid overdose, and also hopefully help people get away from the addiction of opioids.